Picture this. The year is 1883, and the American frontier stretches endlessly across New Mexico's rugged landscape. The sun beats down mercilessly on red clay and sagebrush, where two worlds collide in ways that leave some souls forever caught in between. Desert winds carry the whispers of change, but for some, change feels like a distant dream. This is the story of Eli, a young man whose very existence challenges everything the frontier stands for. Born of an Apache mother's healing hands and a white father's restless spirit, he belongs everywhere and nowhere at once. In a land where blood determines destiny and the color of your skin decides your worth, Eli walks a lonely path between cultures that refuse to claim him. But sometimes, when you've been left in the dust by everyone who should have claimed you, all it takes is one person, one unexpected soul, to see you for who you truly are. And sometimes, that person needs you just as desperately as you need them. This is a tale of two broken hearts finding wholeness in the most unlikely of places, where love doesn't conquer all. It simply makes the unbearable bearable. Where healing comes not from forgetting your wounds, but from finding someone who understands them completely. Before you judge someone caught between two worlds, listen closely. This is a story of love, rejection, and healing in the harsh lands of New Mexico. If you believe stories like this matter, subscribe now. Here, every story honors those who've been left behind. The morning sun cast long shadows across Socorro's dusty main street as Eli Castillo led his paint horse toward the general store. At 20, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned from bitter experience that drawing attention meant inviting trouble, the kind of trouble that could follow a man for days or even weeks in a territory where memories were long and grudges ran deep. His dark hair fell to his shoulders in the traditional Apache way, defying the fashion of white settlements where men cut their hair short and slicked it back with pomade. His sun-weathered skin spoke of heritage that ran as deep as the ancient arroyos cutting through this harsh land, marking him as someone whose people had walked these paths for countless generations. But his pale green eyes, an unexpected gift from his vanished white father, told a different story entirely, one that made people uncomfortable because it challenged their neat categories of who belonged where. The town of Socorro sprawled before him like a collection of wooden boxes scattered across the desert floor, all weathered gray by the relentless sun and frequent dust storms. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and where a man like Eli was always watched, always judged, always found wanting in some essential way that had nothing to do with his character or abilities. "Half-breed," whispered Mrs. Patterson as he passed. Her husband tugged her arm nervously, but the damage was done. It always was. Inside the general store, the familiar ritual began. 3 local ranchers stopped their conversation mid-sentence as he entered, their eyes tracking his every movement. The thick-set man with graying whiskers and tobacco-stained teeth stepped closer when Eli quietly requested supplies. "You got money, boy? Or you planning to trade some of that Apache magic for goods?" The question carried the weight of years of similar encounters, each one designed to remind Eli of his place. "I've got money. Earned honest breaking horses for anyone willing to pay fair wages," Eli replied, his voice steady despite the familiar tightness in his chest. "Breaking horses," scoffed one of the other men. "That what they call it when you whisper devil words to make 'em submit?" The store fell silent except for the slow tick of the wall clock. Horse breaking was dangerous, back-breaking work that required genuine skill, work that even these men couldn't entirely dismiss, though they clearly wanted to try. The rancher's face reddened, but storekeeper Henderson quickly gathered Eli's supplies. As Eli reached for his purchase, counting out the coins with deliberate precision to show he could handle money as well as any white man, the thick-set rancher suddenly grabbed his wrist with a grip that spoke of years working cattle and breaking horses. "There's talk of Apache raids up north," the man said, his breath reeking of whiskey and old tobacco. "Folks are getting nervous, jumpy. Women and children having nightmares. Might be best for everyone concerned if you moved on from these parts, found someplace more suitable for your kind." Eli looked down at the man's calloused hand on his wrist, then back up to his face, noting the challenge in his eyes and the way his companions had positioned themselves to block any easy exit. This was a test, a moment that could define how the rest of his time in Socorro would unfold. "I haven't raided anyone," Eli said quietly, his voice carrying the controlled strength of someone who had learned to channel anger into something more useful than violence. "I break horses for a living and mind my own business. Haven't caused trouble for anyone." "Your business is being what you are," the rancher replied, tightening his grip. "And what you are makes decent, God-fearing people uncomfortable. Makes them wonder what you're really doing out there alone, what you might be planning." For a moment, Eli felt the familiar rage building in his chest, the accumulated fury of a lifetime spent explaining his right to exist, to breathe the same air and walk the same ground as men who judged him by the accident of his birth rather than the content of his character. But his mother's teachings ran deep, and Ayanna had always insisted that a person's true strength lay not in how hard they could strike back, but in how much they could endure while maintaining their dignity. Eli gently pulled free. Then maybe decent people should look a little deeper. Outside, he loaded his supplies with deliberate care, aware that the three men had followed him to the boardwalk and were watching his every move. As he swung up onto Luna, his sturdy paint mare, who had been his only constant companion for the past 5 years, he reflected on his mother's words before she died 8 years ago. Ayanna had been burning with fever, but her dark eyes remained bright with the fierce love that had sustained him through childhood. "Mijo," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the winter wind rattling their small cabin. "You carry 2 worlds in your heart. Most people will only see the conflict, the contradiction that makes them uncomfortable. But someday, someone will see the gift, the healing wisdom of our people combined with your father's restless spirit. Don't let their blindness make you blind to your own worth." At the time, her words had seemed like the fevered rambling of a dying woman. Now, 8 years later, riding through the endless expanse of New Mexico territory with nothing but his horse and his skills to sustain him, he wondered if that someday would ever come. The landscape around him was harsh but breathtakingly beautiful. Red mesas rising from scrubland like ancient monuments to forgotten gods. The distant Sandia Mountains purple with morning haze, and endless sky that stretched from horizon to horizon without judgment or prejudice. This was the only home he'd ever known, even if it didn't always welcome him with open arms. His Apache mother had been cast out from her tribe for the sin of loving a white fur trader. His father had vanished into the wilderness before Eli could even walk, chasing beaver pelts and broken promises towards some distant frontier that never quite materialized. Caught between cultures like a man trying to cross a river on stepping stones that kept shifting beneath his feet, Eli had learned to find solace in the land itself, in the whisper of wind through sage brush, the cry of red-tailed hawks overhead, and the vast silence that asked nothing of him except that he survive another day. As the morning heat began to build in earnest, promising another scorching day typical of the high desert, Eli started looking for shade where he and Luna could rest and find water. The desert was mercilessly unforgiving to those who didn't respect its rhythms and demands. That's when he saw the smoke, a thin, gray column rising from somewhere ahead, too controlled and steady to be a wildfire, but too isolated to be from any settlement he knew of in this desolate stretch of country. Following the winding trail toward the source of the mysterious smoke, his senses alert for any sign of danger, Eli crested a small rise and found himself looking down at a scene that immediately set his nerves on edge. Below him lay a modest ranch house, well-maintained but somehow wrong in ways that his Apache-trained instincts recognized even if he couldn't immediately articulate what troubled him about it. The main house was solidly built of adobe and timber, with a wide porch that suggested family evenings spent watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Outbuildings were scattered around the property in the practical arrangement of a working ranch, a barn large enough for horses and equipment, corrals that should have held livestock, a chicken coop that should have been bustling with activity. But the corral stood empty, their gates hanging open like mouths frozen in silent screams. No horses nickered at his approach, no cattle lowed in the distance, no chickens scratched and clucked in the dust. The entire ranch felt abandoned, as if life had simply stopped and moved on, leaving only the ghost of what had once been a thriving homestead. Yet smoke continued to rise steadily from the stone chimney, suggesting that someone was definitely home, someone who was maintaining a fire despite the eerie emptiness that surrounded the place. The contradiction made Eli's skin crawl with the kind of unease that had kept his ancestors alive in hostile territory for generations. Then he heard it, a voice calling for help. If you think no one could ever love someone like Eli, wait until you see what comes next. Sometimes the heart you've been hiding is exactly what someone else has been searching for. Want to see how everything changes? Stick around. Margaret Sinclair stood in her kitchen, stirring a pot of venison stew with mechanical precision, while her mind churned with the endless worries that had become her constant companions. At 35, she had the weathered hands of a woman who had worked the land for 15 hard years, and eyes that held both unshakable strength and a sadness that ran bone deep. Her husband James had been dead for 6 months now, and she was struggling to keep the ranch running alone against odds that seemed to grow longer with each passing day. The voice Eli heard wasn't hers. It was coming from her injured horse, Ranger, who lay suffering in the barn with a badly infected leg wound that refused to heal despite all her efforts. She'd been nursing him for 4 agonizing days, applying every remedy she knew, but the infection was winning the battle. The thought of losing him broke her heart in ways she hadn't expected. Ranger had been James's favorite, his trusted companion through countless cattle drives and long, lonely days on the range. Losing him would feel like losing another irreplaceable piece of her husband. When she heard hoofbeats, Margaret grabbed her rifle and peered out. A lone rider approached cautiously, a young man with respectful posture. "Hello, the house," he called, stopping 20 feet away. "I heard someone calling for help. My name is Eli Castillo." Margaret studied him through the window. His voice carried no threat, and he'd given his name. Raiders rarely introduced themselves. She opened the door, but kept the rifle ready. "What kind of help?" "Don't know. I heard someone calling. Thought there might be trouble." Another cry from the barn decided her. "My horse is hurt bad. You know anything about horses?" "Some," Eli replied. In the dim interior of the barn, lit only by shafts of dusty sunlight streaming through gaps in the weathered boards, Eli saw immediately why Margaret was so worried about her horse. The animal, a magnificent bay gelding who had clearly been a proud, powerful creature in his prime, lay on his side in a stall bedded deep with fresh straw that was already stained with the evidence of his suffering. Ranger's left hind leg was swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the skin stretched tight and hot to the touch. The smell of infection hung in the air like a warning, that sickly sweet odor that spoke of tissue dying and poison spreading through blood and bone. The horse's eyes, which should have been bright and alert, were dulled with the kind of pain that wore down even the strongest spirit, and his breathing was labored in a way that suggested the infection might already be affecting his entire system. "How long has he been like this?" Eli asked, his voice gentle as he approached the stall with the kind of careful movements that wouldn't startle a suffering animal. "For days since he went down completely," Margaret replied, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold back tears that had been threatening to fall for hours. "It started as such a small thing, just a tiny cut from barbed wire that I cleaned and bandaged like I've done 100 times before. But it got infected so fast, faster than anything I've ever seen. One day he was fine, and the next—" She gestured helplessly at the horse. "What treatments have you tried?" Eli asked, already kneeling beside the stall to get a better look at the wound. "Everything I know," Margaret said, her voice carrying the frustration of someone who prided herself on being capable but had reached the limits of her knowledge. "Salt water washes to clean it, carbolic acid to fight the infection, poultices made from bread and milk like my mother taught me. I even tried some of the patent medicines from the general store, though they cost more than I could afford. Nothing has helped. If anything, he's getting worse by the hour." To Margaret's amazement, Eli somehow managed to calm the hostile, pain-racked animal enough to examine the wound properly. He approached slowly, speaking in low, musical tones that seemed to carry some ancient understanding that transcended species barriers. The horse's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice, and gradually the wild, desperate look in Ranger's eyes began to fade, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. Eli's hands moved over the infected leg with surprising gentleness for someone so young, his fingers reading the story written in swollen flesh and fevered skin. His examination was thorough but careful, and Margaret found herself holding her breath as she watched him work, afraid to disturb whatever magic was happening between man and animal. "It's bad," he said finally, straightening up with a thoughtful expression that gave nothing away. "The infection has gone deep, deeper than most people would know how to treat, but it hasn't reached the bone yet, which means there's still hope if we act quickly and decisively." Margaret felt her heart leap with something she hadn't dared feel for days, genuine hope that Ranger might survive this ordeal. "Can you save him? Please, tell me honestly. I'd rather know the truth than cling to false hope." Eli was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. His mother had taught him that a healer's first responsibility was honesty, that false hope could sometimes be more cruel than harsh truth. But she had also taught him that where there was life, there was always possibility. "Maybe," he said finally, meeting her eyes directly so she could see the sincerity there. "But it will take time, constant care, and some plants that don't grow in this immediate area. There's an Apache remedy my mother used for infections like this, infections that have gone beyond what white medicine can easily handle. It's stronger than anything you'll find in the general store, but sometimes strong medicine is exactly what's needed." Margaret's expression shifted slightly at Apache, but instead of rejection, she asked, "Your mother was Apache?" "Yes, ma'am. She was a healer." "What would you need?" "Plants that grow in specific places. The treatment takes several days." Margaret looked at the stranger, then at her husband's beloved horse suffering in the straw. James had always said sometimes you had to take a leap of faith. "I'm Margaret Sinclair. And yes, I'm willing to trust you." Eli returned at sunset with carefully gathered plants. Ranger was worse, fever higher, breathing labored. They were running out of time. For the next several hours, Margaret watched in growing fascination as Eli worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd learned these skills not from books, but from necessity and generations of inherited knowledge. He moved with practiced efficiency, crushing roots and bark with a steady rhythm, measuring proportions by instinct rather than written recipes. The mixture he created smelled sharp and medicinal, unlike anything from the general store. "My mother learned this from her grandmother, who learned it from hers," he explained as his hands never paused in their work. "It's been passed down through generations of healers. She said healing isn't just about medicine. It's about understanding that every living thing wants to survive, wants to be whole. You just have to give it the right conditions and the time it needs." Through the long night, they took turns applying the steaming poultices to Ranger's swollen leg, coaxing the suffering animal to drink the bitter medicinal tea that might save his life. As the hours slowly passed, they found themselves talking, tentatively at first, then with the growing ease of people who recognized something familiar and comforting in each other. Margaret told him about James and their life together, how they'd met when she was teaching school in Santa Fe, and he was a young rancher full of big dreams and infectious optimism. They'd built this ranch together from nothing, weathering drought and harsh winters, occasional Indian scares, and persistent cattle thieves, always planning and saving for the family they hoped to have someday. But the children never came, no matter how much they prayed or how many doctors they consulted. And then James was thrown from a half-broken bronco last spring. His neck snapped in an instant that changed everything forever. "The hardest part," she admitted as they sat by Ranger's stall around midnight, her voice barely above a whisper in the lamplit darkness, "isn't even the loneliness, though God knows that's hard enough to bear some days. It's everyone assuming I can't manage alone. The bank manager with his patronizing smiles, the neighbors with their well-meaning but insulting offers to help me find a good man. Even our preacher suggesting I should sell out and move back east to live with my sister like some kind of helpless maiden aunt. As if 15 years of building this place with my husband was just playing house, as if I learned nothing about ranching in all that time." "But you're not selling," Eli observed, hearing the steel beneath her soft words and recognizing the same stubborn determination that had kept him moving forward through years of rejection. "No, I'm not selling, and I'm not running away either," Margaret said firmly. This ranch is my life's work, my legacy. James and I poured everything we had into it. Our money, our sweat, our dreams, our very souls. I'll be damned if I let anyone take it from me, just because I'm a woman alone in a world that thinks women can't manage anything more complicated than cooking and sewing. Eli understood that fierce determination intimately. He'd felt it himself every time someone suggested he didn't belong anywhere, that he should go back where he came from. As if there were such a place for someone caught between two worlds that seemed determined to reject him. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you keep going when it feels like everyone and everything is against you, when the whole world seems convinced you're going to fail?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that went to the very heart of both their struggles against a world that judged them before giving them a chance to prove their worth. "I suppose I've learned, through necessity if nothing else, that other people's opinions don't change who I am or what I'm capable of accomplishing. They can think what they want about me being a woman trying to run a ranch alone. I know what I know about my own strength and abilities." As they worked together through that long, seemingly endless night, something fundamental began to shift between them. It started as simple cooperation, two people united in the common goal of saving a life, but gradually deepened into something more meaningful and lasting. They moved around each other with increasing ease, anticipating each other's needs, sharing the work without discussion or negotiation. Around 3 in the morning, when the world was at its darkest and most quiet, Ranger suddenly stirred and tried to lift his head. For the first time in days, his eyes seemed clearer, more aware of his surroundings, and when Margaret offered him water, he actually drank several long swallows instead of just wetting his lips. Eli checked the wound carefully in the lamplight and found that the angry swelling had started to recede, leaving behind tissue that looked healthier than it had since the infection began. The poultice was working exactly as his mother had taught him it would, drawing out the poison that had threatened to kill this magnificent animal. "It's working," he said, unable to hide the relief and satisfaction in his voice. "He's not completely out of danger yet. Infections like this can be tricky, and there's always the chance of setbacks, but he's definitely fighting back now. I think we've turned the corner." Margaret leaned against the stall door, tears of exhaustion and relief streaming down her face as she watched her husband's beloved horse show the first real signs of recovery. "James loved that horse more than anything except me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When Ranger was young and wild, fresh off the range, no one could get near him except James. Everyone said he should sell him, that he'd never be good for anything but crow bait. But James saw something special in him, spent months just talking to him, earning his trust one day at a time. When he finally climbed into the saddle, it was like they'd been partners all their lives, like they understood each other's souls." "You saved him," Margaret said, handing him coffee. "We saved him." As they watched the sunrise, Margaret spoke carefully. "I have a proposition. I need help around here. The bank's suggesting I can't handle things alone. There's a small cabin behind the barn. It's yours if you want it. You trust me? After knowing me one day. You spent all night saving my horse without asking for anything. And I think we understand each other. We both know what it's like to fight for our place in the world. The neighbors won't like it." Margaret's chin lifted stubbornly. "Let them talk. I can't live trying to please people who've already made up their minds." "I accept," Eli said, feeling hope for the first time in years. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural, as if they'd been working together for years rather than days. Eli proved to be everything Margaret had hoped for and more, skilled with horses and cattle, knowledgeable about the land, and most importantly, he treated her as an equal partner rather than a woman who needed guidance or protection. The ranch began to transform under their combined efforts, taking on new life that both of them could feel. But it was more than just the practical improvements. For the first time since James's death, Margaret found herself looking forward to each new day. She enjoyed their shared meals, their evening discussions about ranch business, and the comfortable silences that spoke of growing trust and understanding. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Margaret finally addressed what both of them knew people in town were saying. We need to be clear about what we're building here, she said, her voice carefully measured. What do you think we're building? Eli asked softly. Partnership. Two people who understand what it means to be underestimated, working together to prove the world wrong. Just partnership? Margaret met his eyes. For now. Let's see where that leads us. As summer gave way to fall, their partnership deepened into something warmer. Both began to believe that healing happened not in isolation, but in the company of someone who truly saw you. Winter arrived early, blanketing the ranch in snow. Margaret watched Eli work with horses, moving with patient grace that seemed to reach deep understanding between species. 8 months had passed since that desperate night when he'd saved Ranger's life, and the transformation of the Sinclair ranch was nothing short of remarkable. The fences were solid and well-maintained. The buildings had been weatherproofed against harsh winters, and the small herd of cattle they'd managed to acquire looked healthy and strong. More importantly, the bank had stopped its threatening visits, clearly impressed by the evidence of competent management and growing profitability. But the real transformation was in Margaret herself. For the first time since James's death, she felt truly alive again, not just surviving each day, but actually living it. It wasn't only Eli's capable help around the ranch, though his skills were exceptional. It was the quiet companionship they developed, the shared meals where conversation flowed easily, the evening discussions about everything from ranch business to childhood memories. Margaret. Eli appeared in the doorway, snow dusting his hair. There's a rider coming. Riding hard. The rider was Tom Bradley, a neighbor whose face was grim. His 16-year-old son Samuel had been missing 3 days after going hunting. Tom had found the boy's horse wandering with blood on the saddle. I need help, Tom said desperately. You two know this country better than anyone. Eli was already moving toward the barn. I'll get the horses ready. Over coffee, Tom explained Samuel had been tracking deer into high country when the storm hit. Did Samuel know the old mining camp on Copper Creek? Eli asked. Yeah, why? If he was hurt and the storm hit, that's where I'd head. There's shelter there. They rode out within the hour into what would prove to be some of the most punishing conditions either of them had ever faced. The storm had intensified dramatically, turning the familiar world into a white wilderness where landmarks disappeared entirely and directions became dangerous guesswork. Snow fell so thickly that visibility dropped to mere yards, and the wind howled with a ferocity that seemed determined to strip the very breath from their lungs. The journey was brutal from the very beginning. The snow was knee-deep on the horses and growing deeper by the hour, forcing the animals to struggle and fight for every step forward. The wind cut through even their heaviest winter coats like a knife made of ice, and they had to stop frequently not just to rest the exhausted horses, but to check their own extremities for signs of frostbite. Eli led the way with the confidence born of Apache training, his heritage finally proving its worth as he somehow managed to read the landscape even under the heavy snow cover, finding trails and passages that would have been completely invisible to less experienced eyes. His mother's people had taught him to see what others missed, to find direction when there seemed to be none, and to survive in conditions that would kill most men. During one of their brief rest stops, huddled miserably in the meager shelter of a rocky outcrop, while the wind shrieked around them like a living thing, Tom shared more about his missing son with the desperate need of a father clinging to hope. Inside, they found Samuel alive but injured, his legs splinted with improvised materials. The boy had crawled to safety after his horse spooked at a mountain lion. You did good work, Eli said, examining the splint. They spent the night in the cabin, storm raging outside. Margaret found herself beside Eli, shoulders touching as they fed the fire. You were right about this place, she said softly. I used to think my mother's teachings didn't matter in the white world, Eli continued. Now I think maybe she was preparing me for finding a place where both parts of me could be useful. Is that what you found here? Eli turned to look at her. I think I have. The question is whether it's permanent. When we get back, Margaret said, gathering courage, I want to talk. About us, about what we're building. I'd like that very much. The next evening, after safely delivering Samuel home, they found themselves alone on the porch under stars. I love you, Margaret said simply. I didn't plan to, but there it is. I love you too. More than I thought possible. Are you sure about the complications this brings? Margaret stepped closer, touching his face. I've learned that other people's opinions don't define my worth. I won't let their ignorance keep me from the best thing that's ever happened to me. I used to think I was doomed to wander between worlds, but with you, I feel like I found home. Then stay. Help me build something that belongs to both of us. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative. Their second was deeper, full of suppressed longing and promise of a future they would create together. They married in early summer by a circuit preacher who cared more about love than convention, with Tom Bradley and Samuel as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, words spoken on the ranch porch with vast New Mexico sky as cathedral. Some neighbors continued disapproving, but others came to see that Margaret and Eli made each other stronger, their combined perspectives creating something greater than the sum of its parts. Years later, when people asked about their love story, Margaret would say it wasn't about love conquering all. It was about two people shaped by struggle learning to see the gift in each other's scars, discovering that the things making them outcasts also made them perfect partners. Eli would add that sometimes the best healing came not through forgetting wounds, but finding someone who understood them completely. Someone who saw brokenness not as damage to fix, but as evidence of enduring strength. Together, they built more than a successful ranch. They built testament to the truth that belonging isn't about finding people exactly like you. It's about finding people who value exactly who you are. In a world that tried to divide them, they created space where they could simply be themselves, completely and without apology. And in that space, two hearts left in the dust by a world that couldn't see their worth finally found the home they'd been searching for. Not in a place, but in each other. Have you ever felt trapped between two worlds, like Eli? Or found someone who saw beyond your scars, like Margaret? Tell us your story in the comments. And if this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Here on this channel, we tell stories like this, real, heartfelt, transformative. If you want to experience more, activate the bell and join us.